Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest session of the LPGA Lunch webinar for our East Coast viewers, for brunch webinar for our Chicago folks, and maybe breakfast for the folks on the West Coast. My name is Mike Nichols. I'm the Chief Business Officer of the LPGA Symetra Tour. If you're wondering what that is or what I do all day, you are not alone. But I can assure you that for the next 30 minutes, we will be sharing expertise from members of our LPGA family on how to improve your chipping. So first off, I would like to introduce, for those of you who joined us on many of these webinars, a lady who will need no introduction, Kay Cockerill. She is a two-time U.S. amateur winner. For those of you who don't know, that is the premier event in women's amateur golf, a 10-year member of the LPGA Tour. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention also a winner of a Symetra Tour event in the early part of her professional career. And additionally, most of you recognize her now as an LPGA commentator on the Golf Channel. So Kay, thank you for joining us. And joining us from Rochester, Minnesota, which for those of us in Florida, it looks nice outside. We're all hiding in air conditioning down here. But we have Katie Detlefsen. She is also a former LPGA Symetra Tour member and has made the transition to be an LPGA teaching and club professional. So we love to see that when our professionals go on to another career in the industry. So she's a Class A member, the highest level of our teaching club professionals. So Katie, we're excited to have you joining us as well. Thank you to both for making time for us today.
Happy to be here.
Excellent. So the seminar, as we mentioned today, is on chipping. And for anybody who's ever played golf with me understands the irony of me hosting a seminar on chipping. But I think for you, Katie, let's throw it to you. So for somebody like myself, who maybe is, struggling with their chipping, or even somebody who's new to chipping, can you talk a little bit about some of the things from a technique standpoint that might help them improve their game?
Absolutely. Chipping is such an important part of the game, and practicing chipping can actually help your full swing contact as well, like with your irons if you struggle with contact there. So I'm just going to walk you guys through some basics of chipping, and one of the best things to work on is really your setup and your core basic motion for what I would call a stock chip shot. So we're going to start with your feet nice and close together, nice and tight, close together. And I want you to just make a triangle shape between your shoulders and your hands here. Now, where I see a lot of amateurs run into trouble is they get really flippy or wristy, and that's not what we want to do. We want to maintain this nice triangle, and just imagine that your club head here is tracing the grass back and through. And so this is going to give us nice contact. You're going to get that ball popping up nicely. Even just the feet together is going to help those of you who tend to kind of hit up on the ball, blade them over the green. This is just going to help your contact to be so much better. So feet close, triangle shape, and you're just going to trace like this. And even if you're indoors practicing this, you can just do a few of these a day, just working on that core motion. Once you get that basic motion down, there's a couple of really simple drills that you can do to practice. So when it comes to practice, not all practice sessions are created equal, I like to say. And if we're going to invest a little bit of time, it's nice if that time is going to really pay off in better results on the course. So I like to make my practice into a little bit of a game. So I'm going to share a couple of my favorite games with you. And these ones take like 5 minutes max. So one of the ones I like to do is you're going to take 3 golf balls. So instead of standing in the same place, just hit over and over, you're going to take just 3 balls and you're going to plan out your shot. So out here you can see I've got a landing spot and then I've got my end target. And so I'm going to do 3 golf balls, a practice stroke, and then I'm going to step up, hit my shot. And it's really good to hold your finish too. So you're going to do 3 shots. After you've done the 3, you're going to go to your best of the 3 and go ahead and putt it out. And you're going to keep a scorecard as you go. So you can jot down your score or type it into your phone. And if you have time for 3 holes, it'll take you, less than 10 minutes. If you want a little longer time, you can do a variety of shots and you're going to do multiple holes. And what we're practicing here is not just executing the shot, it taking the time to explore some different scenarios, because when we chip, every chip is going to be a little different on the course. So that's an important thing to do. I have one other little game I'm going to share with you guys. This one's really fun. It's called the Leapfrog game. And this is also a great way, even if you don't have a chipping green at your facility, if you just get to the golf course and you want a game to kind of warm up your golf muscles, get your feel dialed in, this game you're working on distance control. So I'm going to start with a really close chip. So I'm going to try to just barely get it on the green. So just a tiny one. And then on my next shot, I'm going to see if I can make the ball go a little farther than the last one. Okay, so I'm just going to go just a little bit bigger at a time. So I'm working up kind of like a ladder, a little leapfrog game here. And this is going to really dial in your feel. Now, both of these games are kind of fun as like a contest too. So, you know, with the leapfrog one, I like to say if you don't get your next one farther than the last one, then you sort of bust. And so you have to start over, and then there's kind of like a risk reward element. Let's say with the first game with the 3 balls, if you're playing with a scratch golfer, you could make them putt their worst of the 3 and you putt your best of the 3. So it kind of handicaps the game that way to make it fair. But I like to say if the practice isn't fun, then you're probably not practicing well. So it should be a little bit of a game. The technique elements should be fairly simple. Like I said, triangle and just trace. And for your average shot, that's going to get you good, solid contact and good performance for those ones around the green.
Hey, Katie, I want to jump in here and just thinking about what we were talking with Mike earlier, and he has some negative thoughts that he has harbored for many years about chipping. So he probably approaches chipping very negatively and has a lot of stress and tension. How do you get someone past having that tension, too much tension in the chipping shot?
Yeah, great question. So tension is certainly an enemy in golf. The nice thing about this technique is even if you're a little nervous, you're a little tight, you can still kind of get away with some of that. But the 2 things I like to focus on is where you want to land the ball and where you want to finish with your club and body. And you'll notice as I demonstrate this here, I've got a little tiny rotation of my sternum or chest. And I know this is something that a lot of tour players focus on is at that finish position, you'll see that their sternum or their buttons of their shirt are pointed where they want that ball to land. So this looks a lot different than if I'm just kind of going with my hands here. And so that's going to help you by focusing on what you want to do versus what you don't want to do in the shot. So if you're standing over the ball thinking, don't mess this up, don't blade it, you're probably going to run into trouble. If you're focusing on what you do want to do, say, hey, I'm going to make this nice little turn and hold my finish, buttons to the target. I would even do some practice strokes and focus on that end spot right before you approach the ball, and that's going to set you up for some success.
I love this whole topic today because, you know, the short game is probably the most important part of the golf game. And when I was young, I was probably 14, 15 years old, just really getting into the game in Los Gatos, California. And Julie Inkster was just coming on the scene, winning 3 of her straight three U.S. Amateur Championships. And the pro at our course said, you know, you realize Julie Inkster practices her short game 75% of the time. And that was just like an eye-opening moment for me. And I realized I got to up my short game practice. And from that point on, I consciously attempted to at least practice my short game 50% of the time, if not 75% of the time, because it's you know, it's all touch and feel and confidence, and it's these little shots that you just have to repeat over and over again, and you have to develop a love of the short game. It's very creative, the short game is, and yes, you need some fundamental technique that Katie mentioned, for example, with the grip and how you set up and the motion of the chip shot. But once you start getting that down, you can experiment with a lot of different shots. And I love what Katie said about practicing with a purpose and having a game. Another game that I do is I might take 2 balls and go around a chipping green, and I have in my mind I want to chip until I get to 12 points. And if you get up and down with your chip, that's 1 point, and if you sink the chip, that's 2 points. So you keep at it. You might get the exercise done very quickly, or it might take you a while if your chipping's not very good. But having some of those specific games to work on are great. And I want to show you here something that you can do. Mike, you could even do this as well. Is let me get this tip down. So I'm in my house and I've got these foam balls right here. You can have foam balls, these little foam golf balls. They come in all different colors, and there's also golf wiffle balls. And I have a really tight carpet. I don't have a shag carpet, but if you have a shag carpet, that's like you're chipping out of the rough. But if you have this tight carpet, you work on this motion that Katie was talking about, and I have a bucket down there. You can use a garbage can, you could use a plastic bucket, anything you want, and I'm going to just try to hit it in the bucket. That one I caught a little thin, and you'll see right away if you have trouble, that one I nipped it pretty well. And there's my dog Darby. He likes to chase after these balls. So, just giving myself and yourself the opportunity, if you're at home, grab your wedge, grab your sand wedge, order some foam balls. They cost nothing, or some wiffle balls, and make sure you don't hit any furniture, but just, chip 10 or 12 every night, and you'll be amazed how much better you'll be when you go out to the golf course, just because you've developed a sense of where the club face or the bottom of the club is hitting the ground. And you'll feel immediately, oh, I hit that one a little thin. Or if you move up and out of it and you hit it off the toe, the ball will squirt to the right. So you'll get immediate feedback without hurting anything. And just by if you did that every single night, you'd be amazed the next time you went out to play how much more confident you would be.
Okay, you first of all, encourage people to click on the thought bubble at the top and ask questions. But Kay, you've obviously played in countless pro-ams throughout your years on the LPGA Tour. And, is there one sort of thing when you say, it obviously different people have different issues, but was there sort of one thing when you helped somebody with their chipping that was sort of consistent from pro-am amateur to folks you're playing with today out on the golf course?
Well, a lot of it Katie touched on, and the question I asked her is it's tension. And it's just being really rigid, first of all, gripping the club way too tight. And then that leads to too much tension in your arms and your shoulders. And everyone ends up getting this really choppy, very non-rhythmic, it's not a very smooth motion. So if you can release the tension and just feel like you're barely gripping the club and get some fluidity going, that's number one. And number two, Katie, you probably seen this too, is people try to help the ball, and they move their head up and their whole body to try to help the ball get up and onto the green. Instead, just stay really steady. Keep your head still right until after impact. And then there's plenty of time to look up and watch where the ball goes.
Yeah, I love that. And I know there was one question with regards to how we might be able to practice this, even if you don't have like a chipping area or some space. Obviously, we see how we can work on some of this stuff inside, but another great thing to kind of work on is just getting a feel for your length of swing. If you swing the club with my juniors, I like to say we do a little sister swing, and then we do a big brother swing, and then we do, a mama-sized chipping swing, and just having some awareness of that length of swing even. It takes some practice to have some awareness of your length of swing, but that'll actually improve your feel then when you go out onto the golf course too, so that when you're chipping, how big of a swing do I need for this shot in front of me. You'll be able to look at the target and then kind of match that feel for the swing. But I love what Kay said with that fluidity. I always say to my students, just as important as the technique or the positions, and maybe even more important, is that fluidity, that flow. And for some of you, even humming a tune in your head as you do the chipping motion will give you some of that nice little acceleration and good fluid motion that will help your performance.
Katie, also this is another good point that I just thought of. Something my father taught me early on was to try to keep the ball low if possible, more often than not. So that might mean, try to experiment with chipping with a 7-iron or an 8-iron or even a 6-iron. Unless you have to go over some heavy rough or get it over a bunker, the best way is to try to keep it low and get it rolling. And some people even have an affinity towards putting it off the green, or even using a hybrid or a 3-wood as if it were a putting stroke.
Absolutely. There's a ton of similarities. That really the only big difference between this chipping motion and a putting stroke is we have a little more contact with the grass, but that club really is tracing, pretty low on both sides. And actually, if you start with that, even on this shot I'm using here, I'm using a pitching wedge. It's going to fly about halfway and then roll about halfway. But you do want to get that ball rolling sooner, all things considered. And once you learn that shot, it actually becomes pretty easy to translate to a higher lofted club doing the same technique. You'll be able to hit that higher shot. I see a lot of times if people go right to the sand wedge, they tend to want to help that ball up or scoop it up or get too wristy. So if you start with a lower lofted club and you're just thinking of kind of tracing that grass, thinking more similar to that putting action, you'll find that, the ball is just going to kind of pop up on its own as long as you've got that good motion and good brush of the grass.
I mean, honestly, it's such a small, little, simple stroke. Anybody can do it, and anybody can be good at it. And another thing is we often talk about the mental side of the game and the visualization side of the game. It's very, very important to see a good shot and feel like you're going to hit a good shot. Now, you may not pull off that shot, but you have to stay optimistic and positive and visualize what you intend to have happen. And if you start training yourself thinking about what you want to do in a positive way, that's just going to start perpetuating, and it's like a snowball effect in a positive way.
Yes, absolutely. So a couple questions I see on here. One about, where do we want our hand position to be? So I prefer as kind of a guideline for a stock chip shot. Now, I'm not talking a flop shot or some specialty shot that you might see an LPGA player do, but for a normal shot, the back end of that grip for a right-handed golfer is going to point between navel and middle of your forward thigh. Okay, so for right-handed player, it's going to be between navel and middle of the left thigh. So it's going to lean just a little tiny bit forward here. I'll back up so you guys can see it a little better. If you go too much this way or, back here, you're going to run into trouble. But if you have just a slight little forward press, that's going to tend to give you that nice brush of the grass. If you're someone that's taking too big of divots, that means you're probably coming in too steep, okay? So you're coming too much up and down with the wrist. So we're thinking, I like to think airplane landing, not airplane crashing with our average shots, kind of more that trace, okay?
I like that. I like that.
Kay, there was one other question too for, for golfers like myself. It seems like chipping is always there in the big moment, right? You need to get up and down, and that sort of creates all of the tension. I mean, you play winning 2 U.S. women's amateurs with that all being match play. Every hole matters. So one of the questions from the viewers is, what can you do to sort of release tension? As you mentioned, a lot of it probably has to do with confidence, but sort of in the big moments, how have you handled that?
Katie, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, one thing that I love to do is just a breath as part of your routine. A breath and a little bit of a waggle goes a long way, okay? So just like in any sport, if you're getting ready to return a serve in tennis, you're going to have some motion. A basketball player that's going to shoot a free throw, they're going to have some bounce in their legs before they go. They're not starting from a still or stiff position. So the same thing's true about golf. If you can have a little bounce, and it might feel forced at first as you practice this, but practice it on the range before you're in that moment, and you'll get used to kind of taking a little breath, relieving some of that tension, and that's going to help a lot then when you have to execute that motion in the moment.
Another thing, kind of just to tag on that, and we've talked about this with putting, is you can actually grip the club and then really grip it as hard as you can, almost till the veins are popping out of your neck. and then release, and do that 2 or 3 times. And that just physically makes your hands, your forearms, and your arms just relax just by gripping, or you could even clench your fists really tight and then let them go, and that'll just kind of loosen up your hands. And you can do that off to the side while you're waiting, while someone else is chipping, or while they're hitting their shot, and just quietly do that. And no one will even know that you're practicing that sort of release technique.
Yeah, I love that, Kay, because sometimes that tension almost just creeps in, and even just being aware of where am I at? Am I really tight? Am I loose, or am I somewhere in the middle is so important.
And it's very common, even at the highest level, there's some element of that little devil inside of us that sneaks into our brain and says, you're going to screw this shot up. People are watching. They're going to laugh at you. You're going to make a fool of yourself. I mean, I'm telling you, I had those thoughts go through my head as well. But you learn to acknowledge them and let them go and say, I'm not going to listen to that. And I just focus on what you want to do, these positives that like we're teaching you today. And then focus on your target, whether it's the landing spot or the flag stick, and just eliminate the negative. It's always going to be trying to sneak into your brain, but you have to throw it out.
For either of you, are there any players on the LPGA Tour that, as you watch them play, or as you follow them around, Kay, out on the golf course, that you particularly like their chipping motion or their short game in general, that are ones to watch? I mean, obviously, if you're playing at that level, you've probably got a great short game. But is there somebody in particular that our viewers should look for?
Well, Lydia Ko to me comes first to mind, because when I first watched her play, when she was 14 years old, winning the U.S. Amateur Championship, I'd never seen anyone better at that age who had command and feel and touch like she did. I mean, she was as good or better than any woman or man professional. Every shot she had, no matter if it was a high lofted or a low lofted, it darn near almost went in and left her just a little gimme tap in. And that to me shows complete control over your body, over your hands, or your visualization. And to this day, I mean, she's an exceptional chipper. And then on the flip side, you look at, say, someone like Lexi Thompson, who's all power and can smash the ball. Chipping was a weakness for her. Anna Nordquist, she would practically putt out of the rough. Chipping was a weakness. They've both addressed that part of the game and have become much more competent chippers. I'm not going to say that Lexi's the best chipper, but she has gotten so much better in that regard. And so that's a big key, is not being afraid of your weaknesses, but knowing what they are and going out and start working on it and addressing it, getting a lesson and practicing.
Yeah. I would say.
Go ahead, Katie.
Sorry, Mike. I would say one of my favorites on the LPGA Tour, Lydia, is so good. I love Lizette Salas's game too. You know, not a bomber. You know, she's probably 7-8 miles an hour slower than, you know, with driver club head speed than some of the really long hitters, but just gets it done around the green. Like, just fearless. You know, any shot around the green, you feel like she can get up and down.
I think that raises an interesting point. I mean, when you're talking about Lizette versus Lexi, what's interesting, and frankly, in my case, most frustrating at times about my inability to chip or putting, is that you don't have to be tremendously gifted to be a good chipper or putter, right? Like, you know, not everybody's going to be able to drive it like Ann Van Dam or Brittany Lincecum, to have that sort of power and technique. But, you know, chipping is something that is as basic as this, and really, there's no reason that anybody on this webinar, if devoting the time to it, that can develop the technique to be good at chipping. I mean, have you seen people who've elevated their game just by working on their chipping?
Well, let me tell you, I'll talk about my husband. My husband was a 13 handicap earlier this year, and with COVID and staying in place, we did a lot of this chipping in the house, and then we've been out playing. And he also got a great tip from Ben Crenshaw, of all people. And he said, just get your chip on the green. So there's number one. Don't try anything fancy. Get that chip on the green. So it's 25 feet away. That's okay. Then you can two-putt from there and make your bogey or minimize. That's the thing, is you want to get the ball from somewhere at the edge of the green up and in the hole or on and two putt, right? And then once you start doing that with consistency, then maybe you can be a little more aggressive to try to get close to the hole to get up and in. But start simply to get that chip on the putting surface somewhere.
Katie, anything to add as we sort of wrap this up?
No, I think that's awesome. Yeah, I would just say, don't believe the myth that, oh, you're either born with feel or not. The more you practice, the more you can develop that. And then the last thing that I would say is don't let people who are practicing on the range who are maybe, spitting out their extra swing thoughts at you. Just keep it simple. Do not think you have to think about 20 things because it'll be better to just keep it simple.
Great. Well, we're going to wrap up here momentarily with one of our special drive-on features, one of the newest ones. But Katie, for somebody who might be interested in getting a lesson with you, either in Minnesota or Florida, or maybe even talk about for people who aren't in those areas, the opportunity to get one from one of your fellow LPGA professionals, how would they go about finding an LPGA professional in their area?
Yeah, on the LPGA website, there's a find an instructor, so you can search your zip code or area. I'm in the Bonita Springs, Southwest Florida area for most of the year, and Minnesota part of the year. You can also follow me on social. On Instagram, I'm Golf Pro Katie, Katie, Golf Pro Katie, and I like to post some tips and ideas and things on there. So feel free to follow any of my stuff. But the LPGA professionals, I can't recommend my fellow instructors enough because they really know their stuff. So
Excellent. And Kay, where will we see you next out on with the Golf Channel?
Yeah, I'm excited to get back to commentating and holding a microphone and talking about all these great shots and great chip shots, following the best in the world. And that's the way you guys can learn, by watching on television and trying to imitate the best that are doing it. But I'll be at the new drive-on event in Toledo, Ohio, played at the infamous Inverness Golf Course, which is also going to host next year's Solheim Cup. So it's going to be a great sneak preview to that course where the women will be playing in that team competition. And then the week after that is our another LPGA event in Toledo, the Marathon Classic. But I'm actually going to be going to the Washington, D.C. area to work the U.S. Women's Amateur Championship, as Golf Channel has just regained the rights to USGA events, and we're excited about that.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you both for your time. We're going to sort of lead out with the drive-on feature, our latest one on the LPGA.com that you'll be able to see. But I want to encourage folks, once that's over, to stay on for a survey as we continue to have these, the sort of things that you'd like to see going forward, and appreciate you tuning in. But our latest drive-on feature is of So-Yun Yu, who it's quite fitting the timing of this, as she recently won on the KLPGA Tour. She won the Korean Women's Open and donated her entire winner's check of over $200,000 to COVID relief there in Korea. Anybody who's ever dealt with her, she's one of the kindest, friendliest people you'll meet on the LPGA Tour, as I'm sure Kay will attest to. And we just feel privileged to have her as an LPGA member. So Cheryl or Kiernan, if you'll tee up the drive-on feature.
I played piano, violin, and flute. One day my mom asked me the question like, So-Yun, what do you want to be? And I thought that was a silly question because I always thought I was going to become a musician. And she asked, do you like to play golf instead of music? I was like, that's so silly. I've realized, oh my God, I love play golf so much. That's the time I thought, okay, one day I want to be part of LPGA. I think the music and golf has a lot of common stuff. When you're doing well, you're so thrilled about it. When you're not doing well, you're so miserable. I was always compared to other people. I was so mad at myself. I've realized, I'm a human being and sometimes I make a mistake. You cannot really compare to anyone. Golf is part of my life, but golf is not your everything. I just definitely needed to stop this comparison thing. I really needed to love myself instead of really harsh on myself. I'm not young anymore, but I feel like I'm still learning.
Well, thank you again, everybody, for joining us. Kay and Darby is there for the send up. Always the obligatory dog right before we ask somebody to do the survey. That's always a way to spike the ratings. But Appreciate you both joining us for the tips. Personally, I enjoyed the tips. Look forward to putting them to good use. And for anybody who may have joined maybe halfway through this, encourage you to head on over to the LPGA Women's Network, where this will be posted, and these tips will be live in infamy. So I will be watching them repeatedly. And again, Kay and Katie, thanks for your time, for joining us today, and we'll look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you. Enjoyed
Thank
chatting
you.
with you, Mike.
Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Say goodbye for the survey.